going to be in Galatians chapter 5. Coming up on the end. This has one of my favorite things that Paul ever said in the Bible. That's a terrible thing to say. One of my favorite things that Paul, in his way of saying Paulish things. You ever have a friend or know somebody who they just speak their mind? They don't really beat around the bush. They just say things. And sometimes you're like, man, I wish that I could do that. I wish that when somebody said something, I just but I want to be nice. And I want to be friendly. And I want to be liked. I don't really care so much about being liked, but I want to be nice and friendly. Paul did not seem to suffer from that at all. Paul just said whatever he thought, what he believed needed to be said. And in this passage, you have a very strong admonition of what Paul thinks about this entire situation. Today we're going to be in Galatians chapter 5. We're going to try. I doubt we'll make it. We might not even get to what I want to talk about. We'll try. 1 through 12. If you're looking for the really juicy one, it's in 12, so you can read ahead if you'd like. But this passage, it really gets to where Paul has been driving at. Sometimes I think we forget when we take months and months and months to study a book of the Bible, that especially with Paul, I mean, these are letters. They're meant to be written and read out loud kind of all at one time, so that you, as the congregation of that time, would have heard it like right then. Hey, here's all the stuff that we need to talk about. When we get a letter from a friend, most of us don't get those too often anymore. Sometimes you get a letter. Amelia has like one of our friends' daughters that they write letters back and forth. It's real sweet. I'm just not, I don't even like typing out emails. I'm just going to call you and say the things and then hang up. And that's going to be it. But sometimes you have to do email. And wouldn't it be weird if you're just like, well, I'm just going to read the first 3 sentences and then next week I'll read the next 3 sentences. And then at the conclusion, in about a month, I'll have the whole thing worked out. No, that's not how this worked. It was all one big thing that they would work through together at a time. And so when we think through this, sometimes it's easy to forget about where you're coming from in the scope of where you're going. The main issue that Paul is dealing with here is that the Galatians have allowed people to come in that are teaching heresy. The main heresy that he's dealing with here, though, is not just simply Jesus wasn't real, or Jesus wasn't fully God, he wasn't a spirit, or he was a man, or all these different things that people come up with. What he's dealing with is the idea of what salvation itself hangs on. It's a foundational thing. Foundations are very important because if they're not right, everything else leans within it. If you don't get that very base layer correct, everything else goes askew. It's like when you're teaching somebody how to do something. If you don't teach them the right way from the very beginning, you mess up. That's why in the military they tear you down before they rebuild you in the image of what they want you to be, right? That's how it works. They want you to be the very thing that they want you to understand and know and do. What Paul is doing here is he's trying to correct a heresy that is it's foundational in its nature. It's the very core of everything. It's what do we bring to salvation? How does salvation actually work? Is it a joint effort between us and God, and where we bring our good works and he brings his extra grace, whatever it is, mercy, and then we combine the two things and we Captain Planet it up and shoot our laser beams into the sky? No. That's not what's going on here. What happens is we bring nothing to this table except for death and destruction and ruin and being dead. Really, I mean, that's really the core issue there. That we are not even alive to be able to bring something into this. The other side of it is that even if you were alive and able to bring something, what would you bring? What do you have? What could you offer to God in exchange for forgiveness of everything? New life, new hope, new heart. I don't have anything that pays for that. I've used the analogy of going to Disney World and getting the Disney dollars and then taking those home because you didn't spend them all. And then you go to Dollar General and you're like, hey, how many Disney dollars is that? What would they say? Honey, we don't take those. Even at the self-checkout, they don't take those. It doesn't work. The two things are incongruent. And so what Paul is dealing with here is he's saying, these people are telling you that you need to be circumcised, that you need to keep the law, that you need to go and become a Jewish observant person in order to then be justified by Jesus. You need to do your good works and add that into what Jesus is doing. It's very, very similar to what the Mormon people teach. That it's all God's grace after what? All that you can do. You do everything you can and then God makes up the rest. That's what the Mormon teaching is. That seems a lot like what's going on here. It's the same kind of thing. You do all of this stuff and then God, through Jesus and the blood, will kind of make up the rest of your shortcoming and then fix it all. No. Not even a little bit. That's so... It wouldn't even be like a kind of a 4-degree wrong slope on a foundation. That's like a 45-degree. Everything is wrong. You start trying to build on it and it's just completely obvious that it's incorrect. That's the issue that Paul is trying to deal with here all throughout this book. And here's where he starts to get a little bit of the rubber meets the road. I want you to really get this point. In verse 1, let's read through this. We'll stop in verse 6 for now, but then I'm going to try to jump through 12. In verse 1 of chapter 5, it says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. Look, I, Paul, say to you that if you accept circumcision, Christ will be of no advantage to you. I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law. You are severed from Christ. You who would be justified by the law, you have fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit by faith, we ourselves eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love." Stop there for a moment and just think through what he said. The very first thing he says in verse 1, he says, "For freedom, Christ has set us free." That is not what I was taught when I first came to church. Not this church or any church even near this. But the first time I went to church, what I was taught is that I was guilty and that I needed to do something in order to make myself acceptable to God. That was the whole thing. I needed to clean myself up. I needed to work through this. I needed to figure things out. And then I went to a different church and they taught me that, I couldn't really do anything to clean myself up. But once I became a Christian, then it became my job to clean myself up and figure my stuff out and get it all better. It was the same thing, just in a different order. Jesus was still only doing part of it and I was doing the rest of it. When I came to the understanding that I could not do it, I had no value with which to trade for salvation, for forgiveness, for acceptance, for such a great thing as being accepted into the family of the God of the universe. For the removal of my shame, for the forgiveness of every offense that I've ever committed or ever will commit. Think about what that is. I think Paul would be saying "Oh, you who want to be forgiven in and of your own self, think about what you're doing. Think about it. Just think about your own thoughts for a moment. Can you make it through the day without doing one wrong thing? I can't. I've been working at this for a long time, and I'm telling you, I'm a person who really, really, really wants to. I want to do it myself. Me and Rick had talked about this. I know a few guys that are like this, probably most guys are like this, but if you're at home and there's something that you need to carry that's too heavy, we have a very large TV in our garage. I don't know what size it is, but it's as wide as my arms are, and I was putting it on the wall. I took it down and changed the wall that it was on, and it's heavy and it's wide and it's big, and I thought, well, I can do this myself. So I went in, and I took it down. That was no problem. Sit it down. I get the new thing all set up. It's pretty even, and I go to put it back up, and I'm standing there with it in my arms. I'm like, I can do this. I can make it happen. And all of a sudden, it smacked me in the face. And so I did get it up there by myself. I think maybe Natalie helped me. I can't remember. But I surely was not, I wasn't calling anybody. I was doing it. But for a while, there was a big half face print on the side of this television where it reminded me of how stupid I am for always trying to do everything myself. I want to do it myself. I want to carry it myself. I want to be the one that makes it happen. It is difficult for me to submit and understand that I don't have it. I'll never measure up. It's amazing to me that this has been something that's been going on forever. This isn't a new thing within humanity. This is how people have always been. So he says, for freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, because of this, because of the freedom that you've been given, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. Don't go back. Paul has spent 4 chapters of this book setting the stage for that. Don't turn back. Don't go back. Don't take this freedom that you've been given and turn and exchange it for slavery and bondage to sin and law and shame. What a waste. What a stupid thing. And yet it's what we're prone to do. It's so easy. It's almost like falling down. It just kind of happens, right? It is the gravity around every one of us all the time, is this desire to once again be the one that does it. Make it happen. Work, work, work. God will be pleased with me once I create something that He will be pleased with. The understanding that He is pleased with me because of the sacrifice and the blood of Christ is difficult. Something I've known for a long time, and it's still difficult for me. It says, look. I like when Paul just says, like, look, hey, listen, look. I want you to get this. Look, I, Paul, say to you that if you accept circumcision, Christ will be of no advantage to you. I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law. When I first was reading the Bible and I'd read something like this, I'm like, okay, well, there's the unpardonable sin. You get circumcised, like, you're out. You can't do it anymore. Like, it's over. Understand what Paul is saying. He's saying, if you take circumcision, the sign of the covenant between the Jews and God, if you take that and say, here is what I offer to you, God, for my salvation, he says, no. I won't accept it. That's rough. He goes even further. He says, verse 4, he says, you are severed from Christ. You who would be justified by the law, you have fallen away from grace. Isn't it interesting that he uses that word severed? Talking about circumcision, it's such a gruesome thing to talk about. It's just gross, but it's reality. He says, in the same way that this skin is being separated, it's what you are doing to yourself. You are separating yourself from the grace that God has given you. You're falling away from it. If you desire to justify yourself by your works and your deeds and your ability, you're severed from Him. It's not a one-time thing where if this guy goes out and he gets, he's hearing this bad teaching and he says, well, I need to be circumcised. And he goes and gets circumcised and then he's just out. That's not what this is talking about. What he's saying is that if this is the thing that you continuously try to offer to God is your work and your effort, you're severing yourself from Him. You're cutting yourself away from His grace and His mercy by your own effort. It's like being on the branch at the end of it and trying to cut it down. You're cutting yourself off from the very thing that sustains your life. Verse 5 says, "For through the Spirit, by faith, we ourselves eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love." Saying this is the thing that we're doing. We're standing in this world, it drives me crazy, as those who receive mercy and grace and love. We don't produce it. I think in my mind, I oftentimes look at my own self, or used to, sometimes still do, I don't know, as someone who creates, as like a little battery that I work real hard and I effort and I make this thing happen and I send out something into this world that God would be proud of. And it drives me insane to know I am the one that receives. I'm not the Promethean bringer of fire that demonstrates to everyone how awesome I am and shows them this new thing that they need to understand. I'm the one who receives. I'm the one that waits. We like waiting, don't we? I'm the one that waits on the Lord. I'm the one that stands and submits. We've talked about these things. We don't like submitting. We don't like waiting. We want to be the one that produces and creates. And so when Paul is laying out this entire thing for us and he's saying, this is how it works. You're dead, and He gives you life. Period. Not by your own efforts, not by your own ability, not by who you are. He says, look back at Abraham. Abraham was a pagan. He was a bad guy. Even all throughout his life, the only thing he ever really got right was that he was faithful. Throughout his entire life, he did the wrong thing, he messed up, he blew it over and over again, but he was faithful, ultimately. And what does God say? He says he counted his faithfulness as what? Righteousness. His faith was counted to him as righteousness. Not his effort, not his ability. Because if it was based on his effort and ability, what would he have gotten? Nothing. Nothing. Damnation. Hell. Separation from God. Shame. Loss. Destruction. It's not based on what we can do or what we can create. It's based on His love for us. Pure and simple. Let's continue on. It says, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? I feel like maybe this guy, Paul knows who he is. He says he doesn't know exactly who he is, but maybe he's got an idea in his mind, and he knows what's kind of going on there. And he's thinking, he's picturing this guy in his head, and it makes him angry. You ever get angry when you think about something? Over the past couple weeks, we received an email this week. And as I read that email, I got more and more angry. And I'm not a person that often gets angry. If you are wondering whether or not I'm angry about something, look at my ears. That's my tell. If you're playing poker with me, I don't play poker, I don't know what my tell would be. But if you want to know if I'm mad, look at my ears. If they start turning red, I'm mad. I can make my face do anything I really want it to do, but my ears, they tell the story. I was reading this email, and I'm on my phone, we're getting ready for dinner, and it's been a good day, and I'm getting so angry as I'm reading it, because I'm thinking about what the person is saying, and what they're saying to other people. Not about me, I don't care about that, because really it doesn't matter. But the way that they're misleading people, the way they're drawing them away from Christ, it makes me angry. So when I read this, what Paul is writing to these Galatians, I understand what he's saying to them. It's like, hey, you were running well, like you were doing good, we were going together. Now what's going on? Who's hindering you? Who's pulling you away from this? It says this persuasion is not from him who calls you. It's not from Jesus. And then he says this thing I'm sure we've all heard before. He says, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. I don't know the best way to think of this. I had an engineering kid in our youth group in Tennessee, so I had to be very careful about what I said, because he'd be like, well, actually, that's not how that works. And I'm like, look, I'm a dummy. Just let's all be dummies for a minute and just understand me. But if I take salt water and I take fresh water and I pour the salt water into the fresh water, I know, you don't have to tell me, that it's possible to distill it and create fresh water again or whatever. But let's just say that we're dummies and we got 2 cups and that's it. You pour that salt water into the fresh water, what happens? It's all salt now, right? It's not separate anymore. And if you went through with your hand and you tried to separate out the salt, what would happen? Your hand would get wet. And if you had a cut on it, it would sting, because it's still salt water. That's all it is. You can't change it. That's what Paul is saying. He's like, when you let this heresy come in, this one part of it, if you let that come in, it's all in. It's all in. It's all salt water. It's all leaven. Leaven represents sin. He wants you to get it. Like, you can't let just this little part of it. You can't go to God and say, I really like all this grace stuff, but hey, like, I don't like that part of it. I really like some of the stuff that you're saying. I really think Jesus is a good teacher. He says some cool stuff. I like the way he, his whole vibe or whatever people say nowadays. I don't even know. But I don't really like this stuff. This part of submission, like, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. The rest of it's good. That part's bad. I'm going to just kind of blend my own stuff. That's salt. It's leaven. You let just a little bit come in and it leavens the whole thing. You lead yourself right into damnation, right into destruction. Verse 10, he says, I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view. And the one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. That word confidence is a funny word, isn't it? Confidence, we think of something like this, Donald Trump. Is like, when I think of confidence, I think of Donald Trump, because I think of someone who just walks in and is like, yeah, do what I want, I say what I want, I can be whatever I want, because it doesn't really matter. Confident in who I am. We've all met those people who lack confidence. They walk in and they feel like, unequipped or whatever. But that confident thing there, that's such a weird thing. When he's saying this, that I have confidence in this, he's not saying it like I'm proud of myself or anything like that. What he's saying is like, hey, I trust the Lord for you. I trust that God will watch over and protect you. I trust that there will be people within this that cast out the heresy, that turn away from it. He's saying, he said before already, he wants to be there with them so he can go and change his tone and talk about this stuff. But he's saying, like, I have to trust that God will be the one that protects you. The Holy Spirit that lives within them will guide them and keep them from heresy. Keep them from making a shipwreck out of their life. Keep them from destruction. That's a hard thing. Have you ever had to just turn your hands over with people? That you want to go and grab them by the shoulders and shake them and scream in their face, how can you do this? And yet you have to trust. The more of those situations that you have in your life, the more often they are, the harder it gets. The more difficult it is for the next one. But there's confidence and hope in the Lord that we can trust that He is in control. Not just of one situation, but of all situations. Of everything. That's ultimately what salvation is. It's taking all of your confidence and placing it in Him. All of your trust, all of your stuff, all of your everything, all of your hope is in Him. Not not in yourself, not in your ability, not in what you can do or ever will be able to do. It's saying, I submit to you because you have it. You have the very thing that I need. He says in verse 11 here, he says, but if our brothers still preach circumcision, why am I being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. He says, if I'm telling you to do this, why would they persecute you? And he's like, kind of just like, hey, what are you even talking about? And this last thing he says, I've been thinking about this for weeks, probably months. He says, I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. Did you catch that? Think about this term. I know there's some kids in here, and I don't want to be too graphic or anything, but we all know what circumcision is, and we all know what emasculating someone is. I think what he's basically saying is if a little bit of flesh is enough, just go ahead and give them everything. Take care of all of it. If you're so big on doing this thing in order to show God that you're His, just go ahead and give Him everything. Because that's the only way that this works. That's the only way that you can prove to God, is that you give Him the whole lump, right? The whole thing. He's saying if that's how you're going to try to be accepted to God, you better give Him everything. Even that is not enough. I've been in arguments with people before. Most of us have. Have you ever been in an argument that you had to schedule? I've been in ministry long enough that I've had to schedule a number of arguments with people. They're super fun. You look forward to it all day. You're just like, hey, you know what's happening today on the calendar? Argument with this person. It's going to be great. It's not fun. I remember this one specific time, and since this time, me and that person have been able to reconcile. We're in good standing. We talk, friendly. It's like all good. But in that moment, it was not. And it was over I'm not always not in the wrong. This is a big double negative. Sometimes I do the wrong thing. Is that the right way to say it? If you don't believe me, which you probably are not having a problem with that, but if you don't believe me, just ask my family, and they'll be like, hey, yeah, he's apologizing all the time. Like at bedtime, he's praying with us. He's like, I'm sorry for being such a doofus. Sorry. But this was one of those moments where I really had not done the wrong thing that the person was accusing me of. I hadn't messed up. And I remember having this conversation, and they were adamant that I had. They just were completely convinced that I had done this. And I finally said, what do you want from me? Can I give you a pound of my own flesh? Can I just give you something from me to make you forgive me? There's this moment where you stand before God and they're saying, I think that this is the way that I'll do it. This is the thing that He'll accept. I want to come to Him on my terms. And Paul says, well, you better give it all. Even that will never be enough. If we can come to God, if we can be His and be acceptable to God on our own terms, then we are the one who sets the terms. And we can change them as we please. Ultimately, what that becomes is your God. You're the one that sets the terms. You're the one that's in charge. You're the one that gets to say, I like this part, but I don't like that part. It's this thing where it changes the entire nature of the relationship to where you're no longer even worshiping Him or coming before Him. You're just basically saying, I want to do what I want to do, and I don't want there to be any consequences. I just want God to be happy with whatever I'm willing to give Him. No. He will never be. You are not God. You're not in control. You're not the master. You're not the one that sets the scales. You are the one that receives mercy. You are the one that receives grace. You don't get to set terms of the contract. I think probably back then it would have been easier to understand because they had kings. And, if a king said, like, hey, give me your house, you know what you had to do? You just had to, like, give him your house. He's like, hey, I just want your wife to now be my wife. And if you don't like it, I'll just kill you. Because they could do whatever they wanted to, because who were they? They were the king. We live in a very different world with democracy and everything where, somebody does the wrong thing, you can go and sue them. And, depending on what's going on in the world, you might actually receive a fair trial and win, right? You could get recourse for these wrongs, injustices that happen to you. In this time, that's not how it worked. If a Roman soldier came up and they're like, hey, carry my stuff, you know what you did? You carried their stuff. Because if you didn't, they would take their sword out and stab you with it. And you would die. And that was the end of your journey. Your quest was done. It's difficult to look and see how this works, but we need to grasp it. Understand that God is the King of the universe. He is the one that sets the term. He is the one that creates what is acceptable and not acceptable. And what is so incredible about this entire thing is that instead of saying, here's what I find acceptable, here's what I'll take from you, it has to be 1,000 rivers of oil and 1,000 head of bulls and all these different things and these burnt sacrifices and stuff. And he could just say, that's what I want, and you got to go figure out how to do it. Go to the Old Testament and see what he says. He doesn't want that. Micah 6:8 makes it very clear. He wants our faithfulness. And what he did is he said, you can't even be faithful enough. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you my son. I'm going to do the whole thing. I'm going to make a way for my justice to be satisfied. I'm going to create the very thing that I'm commanding that you do. I'm giving you as a gift salvation. I'm absorbing your shame. I'm absorbing everything that you've ever done wrong myself. That's what this is about. That's why this matters, to understand that it's not by our effort, it's by His grace and love. If we start trying to go in any other direction, if we start moving in a way that tries to add to, we're heading for destruction. If you found ways in your own life where you're looking at ways to try to add into this by your behavior, your ability, or what you can build or offer, repent. Repent. Turn away from it now. If you're struggling with these things, and find somebody to struggle with you. Because guess what? We're all struggling through this stuff. That's why the church exists. It's not so that we can just gather up on one day a week and shake hands and say some stuff and then dip out. We exist to do this thing together. God knows that we need one another. So as we think through these things, as we consider what Paul has been saying to the Galatians all of this time, don't just let it be an intellectual understanding about what he's saying to them and how dumb they were. Consider it for your own life. Consider it in your own stuff, how you do things, what you look at, what you think about. Consider it as you stand before a holy God. There will be one question. And it won't be, what did you do for me? It will be, did you trust what I gave you? Did you take the salvation that I offered you through my own Son? That's it. Let's pray.